How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? I've entitled this blog, Where to Next? Back in the 80s, I used to trade with Fred Stafford, usually known as Mr. Gann. He and his son Gary were an interesting pair and had not only a great trading system, but a fund of great stories. Fred once told us that he had a client who tried to forecast rainfall using Gann theory. You do meet some intriguing guys when trading. One of the things Fred reminded us of was that roughly every 500 years the pendulum swings from east to west and back again. He took the view that the pendulum was starting to swing east, and the east was going to overtake the west in the near future. Those who follow my thoughts will know that I am always keen to note the flavour of the year or decade, and ride with that. One thing that strikes me very forcibly is that what we call the West is sinking. It's not the place to invest in, and I wonder these days if it's the place to live. Let me explain. The West started to rise about 500 years ago and thrived for the next few centuries on free market economies. Every so often, someone decided there was too much difference between rich and poor, and a form of socialism was introduced. I noticed that every time that happened, things went downhill. Russia undoubtedly needed change, but the benefits were limited and the social experiment failed after 70 years. We all know what happens when you get a top-down system. Everyone loses. Except those right at the top, of course. In the USA, one of the top cats in what is supposedly a socialist system these days has stocks worth north of $140 million. And the Biden family is worth close to $1 billion. And what have any of them done to benefit anyone else? At least Bezos and Musk are making and selling some useful things. What sticks in my throat is those who make loads of money and fail to benefit anyone else. And that always includes the top politicians. High-profile top-down societies at the moment are China, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Cuba. Not exactly a great advertisement for socialist top-down societies. Let me put it this way. Anyone fancy moving to any of those countries? If not, why espouse their systems and want to join in the disaster? The elite will do well under any system, but of course, what about the rest? I have to admit I don't give a damn what happens to morons, and there are a heck of a lot of them about. But I am not a moron. And rather a lot of us aren't. But we are currently ruled by morons. The sheer amount of outright cheating, lying, and open fixing of data I find incredible. I find it even more incredible that so many idiots believe the lies, despite the fact they're so obvious and have no relation either to common sense or science. In North America last year, it was common for hospital doctors to falsify death certificates to show that people who died of pretty well anything really died of COVID-19. The reason for this was simple, and several doctors went on TV to blow the gaff on this. The government gave you a grant to cover such deaths. So who cares what's on the death certificate? Let's have the money. And nowadays, people are being offered $9,000 to have death certificates changed to COVID-19. Why not? It's free money. And no one bothers to hide this fraud. Yet people still believe the flu is dangerous. If it really was dangerous and we had all these deaths, why do you need to falsify the figures? Well, that's bad enough. But what comes next? Maybe the vote of property confiscation proposed in Germany has slipped your notice. Next month, the German government votes on a proposal to break up property companies because they're controlling the rental figures. Are you invested in such a company to provide for your pension? If so, you'd better sell up right now. Property-owning companies are about to be destroyed, first in Germany and then, presumably, all across Europe. I assume that if a company only owns one property, that will be exempt. But any more, and that company will be at risk of being taken over by the government. Once property rights are no longer sacred, nothing is. Real estate is called real for a reason. Take that reality away, and what does any value rest upon? Of course, that's the first thing a communist state does. Take away your right to own land. Ever come across a communist state that survived for more than a century, or made living conditions better for its people? Well, I refer you to the list above. I bet not a single reader would want to move to any of those places. So why would anyone with half a brain espouse those principles? The most damage is now being done to the middle classes. In medieval times there was no middle class. There were the local lords and the serfs. If you were in the top class, you had money, but to keep it you had to keep going to war. If you were in the underclass, you had nothing. The great thing about a modern society is that the top class is still relatively small, and so is the bottom class. But the middle classes should be taking up between 80% and 90% of the population. Currently, the middle class is growing in most Eastern countries, but it is being decimated in the West. Things are pretty disastrous in North America. In the USA, the middle classes are earning less now, adjusted for inflation, than they were way back in 1970. That's 50 years ago. Now look at Greece, Italy, Spain. In terms of employment and wage purchasing power, all those countries are in serious trouble. The trouble is, rather, a lot of other countries are not far behind. And then there's Germany. The country has been rumbling along barely out of recession for some time, and wages aren't going anywhere there either, hence the sudden attack on rents and rental companies. If all was well in Germany, this attack would not be happening. I think it's time to go east, young man. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a problem. Whereabouts would be the best place to go? Answers on a postcard, please. By next week, when I'll try